Hello, and welcome back to this episode of this Healthy Life podcast. I'm very excited for my guest today. I have Dr. Ryan Greene, and you guys know I'm obsessed with Monarch. You've been following me on Instagram. You know that is my go-to every single morning. And Dr. Ryan Greene is one of the co-founders and also the medical director, and he's here to share a wealth of information on how you can be healthy even if you're not here in the LA area. So welcome, Dr. Greene.
It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining.
Of course, it's crazy to think that an idea that I had on a napkin in a super deep, dark, depressive state of my medical journey is now, helping so many people. So I'm grateful every day.
Awesome. Yeah. Best ideas start on napkins, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'd love for you to start with an introduction about yourself, some of
Sure.
your background, and what led you to start Monarch.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Chicagoland area, western suburb, Wheaton, Illinois. And, it was idyllic upbringing, great parents, good schools, went to University of Illinois. Always thought like medicine was going to be something of interest. But to be honest, I had a neighbor who we'll keep unnamed here who told me when I was a kid, he's like, if you don't know you want to be a physician from your earliest moment, it's not for you. Medicine's not for you. I was like, all right, well, it's not for me. But as I was going through my study, I realized trying to figure out how we can, take care of this body and all the interesting aspects that allow us to be human beings was very interesting to me. So I ended up going to an osteopathic medical school in Denver, Colorado. Really loved the idea of being able to do everything an MD can do, but also learning more about the hands-on manipulative treatments that physical therapists, chiropractors do. I felt like I'd get more of a whole well-rounded experience, which oddly enough has then come back into what we do with Monarch in terms of the holistic approach. But in the traditional medical system, there's only so many ways you can go. You either do internal medicine or psych or surgery. It's kind of like a highway where you can't see an area you'd like to explore and just be like, I'm going to take this path. You have to go a certain way. So I went into the surgical field because I figured, all right, well, if I see a problem, I can fix it with my hands versus playing you should take this medicine and hoping that chemistry works out. And what I realized is for me long-term, spending 100 hours a week for 40 to 50 years in a hospital, super high stress, nothing about that lifestyle was resonating with me in terms of this is what healthy people should do. And also people like you would avoid coming to the hospital unless you absolutely had to. So the question for me was, who am I actually helping other than people that are in, really serious need of help, or more commonly, people that just didn't take care of themselves and then show up at the hospital, we stitch them back together, and inevitably that pattern repeats itself. So a lot of your resources, both, time, effort, energy, and money, go to a lot of things that I felt were preventable. So that led to a divergence in terms of what I thought I wanted versus where my heart and my passion sat. So I took a left turn, so to speak. I went into clinical research at Mayo Clinic, did a fellowship there, learned very quickly anything in the preventive world was not going to be funded. So a lifetime in academia was not going to be something that was suitable. And then that was really tough because, as I alluded to earlier, my entire life had been medicine. Adult life was this pursuit of getting to the point where I was, a physician. And I was just like, man, I don't want to be in a hospital anymore. So what do I do? How can I take this knowledge and passion that I have and help people? And, my parents, everyone that supported me was like, just stay and maybe do emergency medicine. Just stay in the hospital. You can't leave. You have $200,000 in debt. What are you doing now? But I felt really passionate about this idea that I had started to formulate. And, in the beautiful divine plan of the universe, this idea, I was introduced to some people, my now business partners, that had somewhat like a tangential concept, but we were able to merge those together. They had capital, I had the idea, and now we're here. So literally as of January 6th, so 2 days from now, it's 5 years that we've been open in West Hollywood. We're approaching 2 years at our Brentwood location. And 500 plus individuals who have on average been members for 2 years or more. What we're doing is working, and that's incredibly exciting for me because at the same time, and I'm sure we'll get into it, very simple. We're not doing anything complex. At the end of the day, we have created a space, a system, an ecosystem, so to speak, that allows someone like you to show up. And no matter where you're at on your health journey, like we will be able to help guide you to where you want to go. And there's pretty much nothing we cannot do other than, surgical intervention or advanced imaging, which is fine. Like allow hospitals to, my goal long-term is like allow the medical system to be a place of specialty, high-level care that's needed and valuable in very rare instances, and allow everything else from the preventative standpoint to be done in a space that is enjoyable, is supportive, is something that you can show up on a regular basis. You make it part of your lifestyle. Because at the end of the day, and the way I approach longevity in my mind is like, if you want to have a long and healthy life, you have to do things consistently for a long time. And what are those things going to be? Is it supplements? Is it like all these new technologies? Like we don't fully know, but what I am certain about is sleep, hydration, nutrition, maintaining muscle mass, metabolic health, lab data, and then community, going to a place where you feel supported. So I think a lot of people in the medical establishment feel like they're just a number amongst a sea of people. They don't actually get listened to. They're not tended to in a way that we used to do when we were much more tribal. So, at our most significant foundation, like Monarch is a remembrance, so to speak, of like how we used to do it when we had smaller groups of people where everyone took care of everyone else.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's so important to kind of look at those things cohesively too, right? Because it's like you might be going to the gym and doing everything right there, but like, how's your sleep? How's your nutrition? And like, how are your labs looking? And when you just go to your primary care doctor, they're not looking at things from kind of a more functional perspective to see what's going on and how to make like even just subtle tweaks and things, right?
Yeah. And I think, perhaps this is a unique vantage point, but, as someone who's been, neck deep in the traditional medical establishment, I do not believe that there are people in there that don't have our best interest at heart. They are handicapped by the fact that they have to see an extremely unreasonable number of people in an unreasonable amount of time, and they are inhibited by these parameters that ultimately affect the patient, which is like they want to do this, but then you get a crazy bill, so they can't. And so we're like, okay. And your primary care physician would love to understand how are you training and like but they have 7 minutes. Like it's impossible. So at the end of the day, I think we've created something that's scalable and sustainable that allows all aspects of that health program ecosystem, so to speak, to function well, because it's, we understand it's harmony. Like you may see me once a week for a while, which is fine. And then you may not see me for another 3 months. It's great, but you could if you wanted to. And from a training standpoint, maybe you're doing strength and conditioning, but then you get an injury and you're with physical therapy for a while. That's all good. It's all about harmony. Like it doesn't have to be exactly anything. We need to find that flow. And we've created a space for that allows for the inevitability of ebbs and flows in life to be tolerated.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of just support you where you're at, because life is always going to have ups and downs, right?
100%.
So like you have to kind of just check in, meet where you're at, and support yourself.
Your viewers know your journey. Like it has not been up and to the right.
Mm-mm.
And that's okay. And no one's is, but where are you going to go to find your center, to find that place of homeostasis? And I think we've done that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about preventative medicine. So you kind of talked about some of the core pillars of, sleep, hydration, strength training, diet, things like that. And I feel like nowadays you talk to someone and everyone has some sort of health condition or some sort of autoimmune disease or just something going on, right? Like, and so what are things people can do if they're not at that state yet, not sick, and like want to focus on their health and want to be preventative? Like what are some key things in addition to kind of those core pillars?
Yeah. Maybe it's because I'm just not as intelligent as some of the other medical practitioners, but for me, like the lowest hanging fruit, which is very non-sexy, are what are the behaviors that we can replicate on a daily basis that we are not. And so you mentioned most people have no sleep routine. They definitely don't have exercise routines. most people have no idea that you should be drinking, roughly half your body weight in ounces of mineral enhanced water per day. Nutrition. Everyone wants to build muscle, burn fat combination. There's numerous studies that have come out recently that explain, unequivocally, it's all about energy balance, calories in, calories out. Have you ever sat down and wrote, like, how much do I actually eat in a day? And is this going to help or hurt in my direction and goal achieving of changing my body composition? So,
and under eating too, because I feel like fasting is so big right now, and eating small meals and all this. But like, really, even the beginning when I joined Monarch, I had to kind of like track my diet and calories for a few days. I was actually under eating, even though I felt like I was overeating. So it's like, I think when you're strength training, that's a big thing. And you gotta train yourself to do something different, because the human body is incredibly resilient. It's going to adapt. So you'll figure out how to survive doing what you do, but you're not going to perform or arrive at the level that you want to live at if you're not doing all these things consistently. And so, I listened to a podcast, and I was at a conference with the founders of this podcast called The Joys of Compounding. And like, it started as a business podcast, but they realized like compounding and the idea, which is like simple things done consistently over a long period of time, applies to anything, relationships, health. And like, I am convinced that we need to take a step back and allow people to truly assess, like, what are we doing on a daily basis, and how is it helping or hurting us, and how can we develop better habits? Other take home points. I'm fairly convinced everyone has suboptimal vitamin D. I know we're so afraid of the sun now, it's like, it's cover yourself,
skin cancer, or, healthy metabolic sleep, inflammation regulation with vitamin D. It's wild. Like, mental health is a huge thing. And we know seasonal affective disorder is essentially a, lack of vitamin D. But then they're like, well, I don't want skin cancer and I don't want wrinkles. I'm like, all right, would you rather be depressed or, like, what? Those are conversations, that we should be having. So that's a big one. I think, Peter Attia, Mark Hyman, Andrew Huberman, all these incredible people that are, somewhat on the leading edge of this longevity movement. You could more or less summarize, their platform as don't lose muscle mass, don't lose strength. Like, that is pretty much the key to longevity. That's protein intake, plus or minus creatine. Like, have you thought about that? So, my approach is pretty simplistic, especially from a supplement standpoint, which is probably what people are interested in. And, for me, it's vitamin D, it's protein, it's creatine. Like, those are the big ones. And then I do think now that we have the ability, whether it's with a concept like Monarch or Function Health or Life Force or something like that, like, you can measure what your body is telling you, and then you can get a little bit more conscientious in terms of like supplementation or implementation with, other regimens there. But, for the most part, if we look at blue zone populations, they're not doing anything technologically advanced. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And I do feel like we are losing sight of that in the pursuit of these, brilliant technologic advancements. But I don't think we have strong foundations in those simple things. I'm supremely confident of that.
Absolutely. And so let's dive into nutrition for a little bit, because that's one of the core pillars. So, there's so many different theories of like what diet you should be eating and what's good nutrition and what's not. And I think, even myself, before I kind of really learned about health and diet and things like that, I thought I was eating healthy, but looking back, I was eating terrible. So what's kind of your recommendations or viewpoint on diet and nutrition, and what serves our bodies the best?
High level, the best plan for someone is one that they can stick with first and foremost. Second, I think more whole food, plant-based is helpful as like the bedrock of what you're eating. I do think we underconsume protein. Attia's around 2 grams per kilo body weight, which is roughly, if basically your weight in grams of protein is your minimum that you should be consuming. I think most people have a very hard time achieving that amount of protein intake.
And what are ways that you can get more protein into your diet? Because I think, like you said, that is a struggle for people. And even myself, like I eat more kind of like even like a carnivore based diet. Totally. And even with that, I still feel like I'm not hitting my protein goal.
Yeah. I think for people that have decided that animal protein is not something they want to consume, which is a personal decision. Man, it is very hard to get high quantities of protein in a pure plant-based diet without consuming a large volume of food. So if you don't have the ability to track or someone helping you and keeping you on track, my suspicion is you will probably constantly be under consuming protein, protein powders, and again, like trying to find the highest quality. So things that are at Erewhon or, Momentous is an incredible company that NSF certifies, third-party tests everything. That's why it's more expensive. Like there are ways that you can help supplement that protein intake. I personally just haven't consumed a lot of animal protein, but as of late, I'm 225 pounds. I'm like, damn, I need to get more protein in because I think I've been under consuming. So I've looked at, Maui Nui venison, like super high quality grass fed. And I don't have any affiliation with any of these groups. Like this is just what I use. And so those are interesting ways to do it. Fiber is the other one. I don't think I know people aren't getting enough fiber. Like from females to males, it's 35 to 40 grams of fiber per day. Like use ChatGPT. It's an incredible resource. And just be like, how do I get 40 grams of fiber? Like type in your diet. I think you'll be surprised at like the recommendations and where you land on that spectrum. But I am seeing a lot of, cholesterol issues that are often improved or alleviated by people getting enough fiber, whether that's just increasing it in their diet or adding a psyllium or some sort of product. But, protein, fiber, which is, kind of correlates with eating more whole foods plants, as there's plenty of fiber in those foods. But then from an animal protein standpoint, like quality matters. And do you remember Bel Campo? Travesty.
I know, the scandal,
right? And I think
I used to get all my meat there, and then I was just horrified at the way it all went down. But but Standings is a great butcher shop here in LA.
Yeah, I haven't been, so I should check it out. But finding high quality animal protein is getting more difficult, and I think education around like food marketing would be helpful for consumers. I don't know how to execute that; it's beyond my scope, but. There's a really good book called
maybe in the new year with Monarch. Right?
Yeah, maybe it's part of our podcast. But there's a really good book called Real Food, Fake Food that a gentleman just goes through and kind of sheds light on what's allowed in our country in terms of food marketing. And I think you would be surprised at what we are allowing people to get away with.
And even just ingredients too. I mean, you take a product, the ingredients here versus the ingredients in Europe, same product, same thing, but completely different set of ingredients, right?
Crazy.
And so many things are banned there that we're allowed to eat here, and just a concoction of chemicals, really. So, I mean, I agree, sticking to whole foods as much as possible, nothing in a package.
Yeah.
It's just, if you can even just do that, whether you want to be more plant-based or more, animal-based, like just sticking to something that's natural and not packaged is going to get you a lot farther than any other sort of diet.
And I think that's another point that has to be brought up. And I have a colleague who's starting a fund that essentially, I don't think you'll mind me talking about it. It's called The Good Group, but essentially we are fortunate that we can go to Erewhon or Standings. We have more farmers markets per capita than anywhere in maybe the world. We are very fortunate. Where I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago, Chili's, Applebee's, traditional grocery stores, like that's fine dining. No offense to that part of the world. My friends that are still there.
I know we do kind of live in a bubble here, and I forget that sometimes, right? I'm like, I have all these things accessible to me, so I just assume that everyone does, but it is good to kind of bring it back into perspective and say the majority of the world, and especially the US, does not have access to those things.
And that's the purpose of this gentleman's fund is there is a large gap between where we are living and what everyone else has exposure to. And it's an interesting paradigm because if you think about like, my business partners do high energy fine dining. So I've been in the room with menu creation, and I understand like what goes into that for various different things. Finding wild caught, grass fed, grass finished, very difficult, very expensive. Yeah. The truth of the matter is like the access to that is dwindling. So his hypothesis with this fund is like, okay, maybe we're not getting people Erewhon grade products. Great. But right now they have terrible. So what's good? What's that middle ground that at least gets them from where they're at closer to where we hope that they should be? Because the other part with healthy food, and I've learned this from advising with groups that are producing consumer goods, it's very hard to scale healthy food. Lenny and Larry's cookies used to be great. Now they're at 7-Eleven. Allegedly, it's like the same quality, but it doesn't taste like the same quality. So that's another thing that has to be solved, is like, how do we improve the production and scale of at least like good stuff? Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it has some seed oils in it, but like it's better than bodega, you know, whatever we're getting. And I do think that's something, it's, you know, it's not the most sexy thought, so to speak, but I do think that part of what we're battling is this elitist mentality. It's like, we have this knowledge and we're trying to share it, but then the people that are consuming it, like, where do they go to put it into practice, right? And I whether it's with Monarch, it's been on top of mind for me, because like, you know, in med school, they beat into your head like anyone can memorize anything, but can you put it into practice when it doesn't look exactly like what you saw in the book? And I think that's kind of where we're at now, especially in the world of health and wellness, is like, we have a lot of really smart people that are absolutely accurate in terms of what they're talking about. But then the consumer, like, how do they take that and put it into practice, whether it's food, whether it's metabolic testing, whether it's exercise? You know, for instance, my dad, I was like, you need to get your ApoB checked. Cardiovascular disease risk metric. Doesn't fall in the parameters of his primary care visit in suburban Phoenix. You fall off, right? Like, and then the momentum dies and people end up going back to what they normally do. And we continue to perpetuate this cycle in perpetuity. So, it's, you know, for lack of a better explanation, I think I have and we at Monarch have this understanding that, there is a goal that we would all like to achieve, but, you know, that's peak Everest right now. We are at base camp, and we've got a lot of room to grow. And how do we get people to get there? So that's part of our mission moving forward, is like
Monarch in every city.
100%. And like we probably won't be producing Brian Johnson acolytes. Like, that's not our focus. And there's people that want to do that and can do that, and that's great. But I'm also seeing people that, like, step one is very difficult for them. So how do we get them to at least make some incremental progress?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about mental health as well. So,
Great.
you know, we talked about that being one of the key pieces to longevity and kind of being healthy and aging gracefully. So, you know, everyone has some sort of mental health issue, right?
Totally.
Like, whether it's like a past trauma or something that you're struggling with, or depression, or vitamin D's too low, and, you know, sad in the winter, but, you know, all these things. So what are some things that people can do? I know you'd like to do a lot of work with psychedelics like ketamine and psilocybin as well, which can be such an effective tool in helping with this kind of aspect of it. So what are some things that people can do in this arena to really make sure that they're supporting their mental health and well-being in that sense?
Sure. First and foremost, like, get good sleep. If you're not getting good sleep, you're screwed. 7 to 8 hours, great in terms of duration, but truthfully, routine is going to be more important. So even if you're 5.5, 6,
I have my Oura ring, and it's like so crazy to see the different things that affect my sleep. Like even like alcohol, like I've cut way back on alcohol. Like I barely am drinking these days, maybe on the weekends, like, you know, for fun. But I noticed even like one glass of wine at dinner, my sleep would be horrific. I was just like, I would wake up, I was like really starting to feel it. But having that tool tell me that my sleep was being effective, I was like, I need to make a change. Like, this is crazy.
I mean, it's crazy that, you know, you shouldn't drink and drive for sure, but you also shouldn't be sleep deprived and drive, and you shouldn't be sleep deprived making medical decisions, which is like how we live. I lived a lot of my life. So, if you have to go to the hospital at 2 a.m., good luck. But sleep, super important. The other interesting one that pretty much everyone has access to that I've found is very beneficial is cold exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So in places in the United States where it's winter, like you want to make yourself feel better, like go stand outside for 2 minutes and then come back indoors. Like I guarantee your mental state will improve. And that has been proven. There's a really good book by Anna Lemke called Dopamine Nation, where she describes the science behind that cold stressor. The body hates to be cold. If you subject yourself to a cold environment for at least 90 seconds, the amount of dopamine that is subsequently produced is like 400 to 600% what is normally circulating. So pretty much everyone can take a cold shower. You can go outside. You have access to a cold plunge at Monarch. Like, if you are stressed, and you can just jump in a cold shower for 2 minutes, I promise you on the other side, you at least will be in a better mental state.
Why is that? Why is it the cold helps versus saying a sauna or doing a heat therapy?
Yeah, it's a hormetic stress. So, the principle of homeopathic medicine, which was the major practice of medicine in our country up until the early 1900s, is like treats like. So, things, for instance, like if you had a fever, they would give you something that was microdiluted that would also stimulate a fever. It kills bacteria, viruses. So it's a similar pathway in the brain, which is especially with cold exposure, if you expose yourself to that stimulus, your body will tolerate it for a period of time. And then when you remove, the reward innately that your body says, thank you for taking us out of that extreme environment, is dopamine production. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's a evolution based adaptation that basically rewards you for getting out of an environment that could potentially kill you. You know what I'm saying? Same thing with heat. So you could sauna, but it takes just a little bit more time. 90 seconds in a cold shower. Like we have patients who are DJs, producers, they're up late. They have to go to sleep and travel the next day. Like they're starting to cold plunge, cold shower before they go to bed because it helps them wind down and feel better and get good sleep. With Aura, part of, a healthy sleep routine, mental health related, is you want to sleep in a cold room. So if you're riled up, you take a cold shower, it decreases your core body temperature, you can get a little bit better sleep. So it's almost like a paradox, which is I want to go to bed. Getting in cold is going to wake me up, but in actuality, it's going to start to accelerate not only you feeling better, not having as much anxiety, but in terms of sleep, helping you sleep a little bit better. So that's an easy one that pretty much anyone can do, is just stand in a cold shower. I
noticed a dark room is really important for sleep too, especially with all our tech and technology. There's little blinking lights everywhere, crack of light from the street lights coming in the window. So doing a sleeping mask, blackout shades has been a game changer for me too.
Yeah. And then the psychedelic one is, I have been fortunate that I've been able to go to parts outside of the United States with groups of people, veterans, athletes, people with brain injury, where this work, these medicines ancient medicine is decriminalized. And I've seen incredibly powerful changes in human beings with a couple treatments. Absolutely, you need the right environment with the right people, the right intention. Like Michael Pollan in his book, How to Change Your Mind, is spot on. Set and setting matters. Yeah. Going to a rave and taking mushrooms is a totally different experience than a ceremonial setting.
Intentional workshop.
Yeah.
Ceremony.
I was recently able to screen a documentary that'll be coming out soon, looking at indigenous cultures in South America and their work with ayahuasca, and incredible. I have no desire to do ayahuasca, but a lot of people do. Aaron Rodgers has a documentary out right now talking about his work with that and how it's changed his life. So I do think psychedelic assisted therapy will allow us to come back from a significant reliance on anxiety meds, SSRIs, things that are, symptom improving, which for some people, in an acute state, that may be what you need. Totally fine. Long term, the curative potential people not wanting to be on mood altering medications the rest of their life, I do think there's a lot of hope for psilocybin, MDMA. Ketamine's already been well described. So what we're going to do with Monarch, because I do believe mind and body must be integrated. I do believe, and I've learned a lot as of late, that like how we feel dictates how we function. And a lot of people are uncomfortable sitting with their feelings and appreciating like my depression may be causing me to have back pain because I'm just sitting and I'm not doing, like, there's a lot of work that's not done in the United States that's slowly making its way into our culture, that I think will be helpful in that mental health space. And I do think psychedelic assisted therapy is going to be revolutionary. We do have to get out of our own way in terms of like allowing this to become widely accessible, but also, like, you know, with anything, too much of anything is not necessarily a good thing. So I do understand why, you know, people want more understanding of like how these things work, but also like cultures have been using this for thousands of years. Like at some point, I don't know if we need to like beat the horse to death in terms of trying to figure out
something that works,
the exact, you know, like dosing. It's just like, so we'll see what happens with that. But I'm going to continue my work where it is legal for right now, and hope we'll be ready once it eventually makes its way into the U.S. population.
Psilocybin's almost legal in California, right?
We're
almost getting close.
But you know, again, like most people who have mental health issues probably aren't eating right. They're probably not exercising enough, or maybe they're exercising too much. They're not sleeping well, and vice versa. Like, so I think for us as a Monarch model, being able to say, hey, like, as part of your experience, we will be able to help you mind, body, and spirit, I think will be incredibly important. And, you know, it gives us room to grow. Like, we're absolutely not done expanding, whether it's brick and mortars or service offerings. So it's exciting.
And then, so let's talk a little bit about ketamine and psilocybin. Like, what's the difference, or like what different kind of circumstances do you want to use one versus the other? Is it more kind of what the person's dealing with or what they want to work on and heal? Or is it certain types of people do better with one versus the other? What's kind of your experience with that?
Yeah. So ketamine, I mean, is well described and clinically indicated for people with treatment resistant depression. So they've tried other things, medication, talk therapy, combination, and for whatever reason, just like unable to achieve the outcomes they're hoping to achieve. So that's where ketamine's super effective. Psilocybin is my favorite thing on this planet. First of all, it has a wide array of efficacy. Depression, certainly, PTSD, definitely, anxiety, and you know, for people with like mild traumatic, maybe traumatic brain injury, it looks like there's a neuroprotective or restorative effect there with like continued use over time. But also that's kind of confounded because a lot of people with mental health issues tend to medicate with alcohol, which is a depressant, versus a lot of these alternative therapies, which are very much like mind expanding. And we did, when I was in Jamaica one time with a group, we had this device called a kernel, like Kernel. Looks like a snowboard helmet, but it's essentially like a functional EEG. So you can see in real time what's happening to people's brains. Like when psilocybin is on board, it is like a beautiful color palette of activity and parts of the brain, like waking up and talking to other. It's incredible. And we still have a lot to learn there, but I think psilocybin has more like broad effect, anxiety, depression, PTSD, brain injury recovery. Ketamine's a little bit more just, you know, major depression. So I think they can be used interchangeably. But right now, like ketamine depression is definitely
what's helping.
Yeah, super important.
And then, so if someone does have depression, wants to use ketamine as a tool, like, do you do like a couple weeks of intensive therapy with it? Or is it kind of like a every now and then that you find makes a difference, or what's kind of a course of action?
Yeah, no, that's a good thought. So typically minimum 2 treatment sessions, whether it's intramuscularly administered. Some people are doing oral dissolvable tabs. IV administration is another route. Typically 2 sessions is minimum. And the reason is like most people, when they, enter into this type of world of psychedelic assisted therapy, there's a fear, there's a letting go of control factor that a lot of people are not comfortable with. So the first time, it's kind of like a first date. It's like getting to know you a little bit. And then once you realize like, all right, I'm not going to end up, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, like my brain broke. Then that second time and beyond,
you go a little deeper.
Yeah. Right. And so most people, 4 to 6 sessions is probably a reasonable treatment course. Trying to do them in rather rapid succession seems to be most effective. The most important part, anyone can sit and get an IV or get a shot of ketamine. The most important part is letting go of control and like whatever comes to you, let it come to you. And what do you do with it? That's where integration is super important. So you need someone, a therapist who, hopefully knows you a little bit and can have conversations in the interim, because you can't live in a psychedelic state all the time. Your brain would explode. So you have to bring these lessons back into the real world. And that integration of what you're learning is so critical that a lot of people fail to do. And like, admittedly, sometimes when I, do larger dose experiences, like I should take a day or 2 just to kind of like sit with what I learned and journal or talk with my therapist, and I just go back to work, and it's probably not the most effective way. So that work is super important. And fortunately, we are educating and building more programs for therapists who want to understand how to work with people that are using psychedelics. And that's going to be super important, because those people are very, very critical for someone's outcomes.
Yeah, that seems like it's, one part of the healing process is definitely going to be actually, doing the psychedelics and having that experience, but then how you kind of bring it back into your life and heal from it and use it as a healing tool. Yeah.
It's like surgery. Like, I can replace your hip, but like, do you let your sutures heal? Do you get up and start doing more things? And I tell you, like, if you don't take that time to recover, like the procedure is not going to be as effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Awesome. And then, so let's talk a little bit about strength training. So it's kind of all over the place here, but I want to touch on that because, it's such an important thing. And I know when I remember when I joined Monarch and you guys were kind of doing like the first assessment, it was like, how many push-ups can you do? How many pull-ups can you do? And I was like, why is this important? And I remember Kenny telling me, he's like, because when you're old and you fall, you need to be able to push yourself up. And I swear, like a month later, we were in New York City and this old person fell and they could not push themselves off the ground. I told Adam, I was like, this is why I go to Monarch, so that I can get up when this 100%. Happens to me. So I want to
can put your bag when you travel in the overhead compartment.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't tear your rotator cuff trying to do that.
Exactly. So I think people, are so afraid of weight training. I think like things are starting to shift a little bit, because even I kind of had that perspective, right? Like I was like, I don't want to get big, I don't want to get bulky, but it's not about that. It's about, strengthening your body, making sure that you're resilient when you're old. And I see this in my parents, like they don't do strength training. They definitely have like muscle wasting. They do a ton of walking, but I'm like, but can you push yourself up? Like they can't, So I think it's such an important thing to talk about, and want to have you share the importance of strength training and what people can do to make sure they're, making sure that part of their health is being dealt with.
Yeah. The longevity equation, as we alluded to earlier, comes down to muscle mass. Plenty of data now that shows if you can maintain muscle mass as much as you can for as long as you can, you will avoid many of the diseases that are associated with aging, primarily cognitive decline. There is a direct link between muscle mass maintenance and cognitive performance. And that's where creatine is super interesting, because it can help us maintain not only muscle mass, but it also looks like it has a neuroprotective effect. So there's some studies that looked at older people that didn't even exercise that much, but took creatine, and they preserved.
I need to get on creatine. That's the one piece I'm missing. So I'm glad we're talking about this.
Yeah. And so that's super interesting there, but everyone is going to lose muscle mass as you get older. It's inevitable. The question is how much do you have when that process starts? And then also, what are you doing to mitigate that? So typically every decade around, 35 and older, you're losing 5 to 10% of your total muscle mass per decade. You can build muscle as long as you're eating enough protein and you're strength training, but typically you're still going to lose around 2%, even in the best case scenario, right? most people don't start this process until they get a lot older. And unfortunately, they're just so far behind. It's difficult to make meaningful progress. But from our perspective, like strength training can look like however you want it to look. That being said, the principles of progressive overload must be followed, meaning like you need to be able to do patterns, one, appropriately, but then slowly and incrementally increase the amount of mass or weight that you're lifting, because you will then allow your body to adapt neurologically and generate more force with the muscle you have. And that's where the bulky conversation has to end, which is if you're not eating enough calories and protein, you are not going to build muscle mass. Muscle is a highly metabolic tissue that requires a lot of calories to be sustained. Think about if you ever get sick for a week or two, like on the other end, you're down 10, 15 pounds. Like your body's not going to just keep this high energy tissue if you're not feeding it. And that's the other part of strength training, which is in the name, is strength. So not only is muscle mass maintenance important, but power. What can you do with the muscle that you have? Right? And that is also an indicator of mortality, grip strength. Like we have you guys do the dynamometer, which is a grip strength metric. That in itself is a very accurate predictor of mortality. When you see people's grip strength starting to decline, they're either not training right or like something is happening metabolically that is going to lead to problems down the road. So, you know, our programs are built around the traditional principles of strength training that have been used by college and professional sports. You know, it's a certain number of sets, certain number of reps, playing with tempo, playing with work time, rest time. You know, a lot of people are like, I can squat, 500 pounds. And you're like, well, one, do you do it correctly? But also like, what happens if you did less weight for a 5-second decline? Like that's really difficult. And I'm sure you've been through all that. So there's numerous different ways that you can write a program, but ultimately, if you are not measuring some of these metrics associated with muscle mass, which we do with our body comp assessments, and also like the power, how many push-ups can you do? How many pull-ups can you do? You know, we have you guys on the force plates. So we're looking at what's called counter movement jump, lower extremity force production, grip strength. Like those are all metrics that are pretty easy to do. Like anyone who's listening to this can today just do how many push-ups can you do? And then if you're training, check again in 3 months. And like, if you haven't improved your push-up volume, like you may want to reassess how you're training, because I don't know if it's helping you generate either muscle mass or power, right? Obviously there's a cap, at some point the muscle will fatigue, but most people are nowhere near that performance.
How many push-ups should you be able to have gone up in 3 months to know that you're kind of on track?
Yeah, it depends. It
depends.
It totally depends. We don't have specific metrics.
Like more than one, right?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully if you did. Yeah.
At least, even then, at least 3 or 5.
Yeah, if it was 0 and then it was 1, like,
that's an improvement, I guess,
yeah,
right?
if you fall and break your hip, at least you got a shot. Before you had no shot. Yeah, but I mean, for us, we'll typically see, 5 to 10% improvement per quarter, which is great. And I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, we have time for one more question.
Great.
So I want to chat with you. You mentioned that Monarch's been open for 5 years.
Yes.
Obviously, you've seen a lot of people kind of come through. What's just one big success story that kind of stands out to you of someone that came in and really kind of took advantage of the whole Monarch system and is thriving today and had, a true transformation with the system?
I'm going to say you're self-excluded because everyone knows your journey.
Yeah.
We had a gentleman, work took him away from LA. Could not walk up the street, lived local to Monarch, couldn't walk up the street to like actually get to the club.
Wow.
Wasn't that old, like late 50s, early 60s. But when you looked at him, it was no less than 75, 80 years old. Took a lot of time, took a lot of consistent effort with our team. But before you know it, squatting, deadlifting more than any weight he's ever lifted in his entire life, walking up the street without not one like significant hip pain, but also without getting out of breath. And so, yeah, you know, it's not, there are no quick fixes, but I am confident based on what we've seen, like it does not matter where you're starting. As long as you show up, you can get to wherever you want to go. I have a gentleman that I saw this morning actually at our Brentwood club, you know, 2x'd his bench press at 58 years old. Like he's almost, and like you look at him and it's not like he's Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it's just that progressive compounded effort yields incredible results. And, you know, he said to me verbatim today, he goes, none of my friends can actually do a full squat and I'm squatting 300 pounds. Awesome. What does that mean in terms of longevity? I have no idea quite yet, but I suspect he will probably not succumb to many of the things that his cohort will. And I think if I can look back 50, 60 years down the road and we have millions of people who have just improved the quality of their lives because they're participating in this system, it's a win. Someone's got to do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much. If people want to find you online and Monarch, what's the best place to find you?
So online, it's at Monarch Clubs. My Instagram's at Dr._Greene with an E at the end _DO. Full disclosure, doing a digital detox right now. So if I don't get back to you on Instagram, I apologize. But if you want to put my email in the show notes, like absolutely reach out to me. I will take the time to get back to you and answer whatever questions you have.
Awesome. We'll put everything in the show notes. Thank you so much, Dr. Greene.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.